The full episode is now available on Patreon and YouTube memberships. Please see the link in the description for more details.
Speaking of Shogun, have you
Mm.
seen it yet? I know I've been bugging you about this, but it's so good. Preston, it's easily one of the top 3 best shows so far of the year.
I haven't seen it yet. I read the book. I haven't seen the show. I heard that the show is different from the book, and that the book is from the white guy's perspective, and that the show just makes the white guy like one character among many in a big ensemble.
That is actually correct. Yeah, that is true. That is true that you point that out. It reminds me of a lot of the Netflix shows from the mid 2010s. Did you ever watch Orange is the New Black?
No.
Orange is the New Black is about this affluent white woman, Piper, who did some crime in the past, and it finally caught up with her, and now she has to go to jail for a bit. And every episode focuses on the backstories of the inmates she meets. She is supposed to be the main character, but as the series progresses, she becomes kind of a background character, and the other inmates are the main characters, and they're usually not like Piper at all. It's kind of like that, and the same thing happened with Marco Polo. The show is supposed to be about Marco's adventures in Mongolian-controlled China, but really the star of the show was Kublai. It's kind of what happened here. It's supposed to be Blackthorne's adventure in ancient feudal Japan, but he really does take a back seat to Toranaga, based off Tokugawa Ieyasu, and Mariko. And my God, Preston, it is so fucking good. They do change a couple things from the book, but for the most part, it's right there. I'm not gonna lie, I want a season 2, but I know there is no second book. There's no Shogun 2.
Oh.
But at the same time, trust me, when you watch this, you'll be like, we need a season 2. But here's the thing, though. Handmaid's Tale did the same thing. The original Handmaid's Tale was one book, and they made a 1 season off that. And then they announced season 2. Season 2 came out as actually my favorite season. I really liked season 2 of Handmaid's Tale. I thought it was great. You could totally, with competent writers, you could totally do a sequel to a 1-book adaptation. No problem. Easy.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that come to mind when I think of like things that where it was never meant to go beyond, but then they did a second season anyway. Handmaid's Tale, Leftovers. The book is just about the first season, and then they kept going. Yeah, seasons 2 and 3 are new. I think Big Little Lies. Their season 2 was kind of like new material, because it's just the book is the first season, but they didn't go any further than that. I'm trying to think of a few others where they're just like, okay, no, we can keep going with it, even though we've exhausted the source material. I mean, Game of Thrones technically did it too. The
reason I won't put Game of Thrones in there when it comes to exhausting book material is because George still gave Dave and Dan outlines of what he wants. Like he told Dave and Dan he wants Bran to be king in the end. George didn't have it all thought out yet, so Dave and Dan had to do the best they could with what they had. I would argue they should have done their own thing instead of taking George's ideas for the end that weren't completely thought out, but whatever. There is one article we discussed this briefly in private, but I wanted to bring it back to you. IGN had an article that says, Shogun is everything Game of Thrones should have been. Obviously, it's unfair to say that, because Shogun is 1 book, it's done. Game of Thrones, not done. But this one paragraph here, I think you are someone very well equipped to answer this, because you are someone who has studied the feminine characters in Ice and Fire very, very closely, and I wanted to throw this at you. Quote from the article: compare that to Game of Thrones and think about the first time we met Daenerys Targaryen. She's naked and abused by her controlling older brother out to sell her off. Or the introduction of Cersei Lannister, an incestuous child killer. Throughout the entire run of Game of Thrones, those women would go on to become slightly more complex and arguably strong characters, but those arcs were built on their own humiliation. And as the show came to an end, they would go on to both become hysterical, cartoonish stereotypes of rage-filled women. In the case of the original Game of Thrones, creator George R. R. Martin, he's argued that he's showcasing historical accuracy. The books reflect a patriarchal society based on the Middle Ages. The Middle Ages were not a time of sexual egalitarianism. It was very classist, dividing people into 3 classes. However, with Shogun, Mariko is introduced as an engaging, inviting vital lead with her own interior world, wants, and agenda. Her role as a translator is a direct contradiction of the Orientalist and overused tropes of silent Asian women, instead giving her voice a deep power and presence within the story. And he goes on to list a bunch of characters, but what I basically want to close it off with is, in Shogun, womanhood is far more respected, eclectic, and interesting proposition. Women get to be assassins, mothers, maids, leaders to plot and scheme, but also to love and nurture.
I mean, I mean, I don't understand how they're putting it to like clashing it with Game of Thrones. Like Game of Thrones portrayed women doing all of those things. Like, what are they talking about? Like women were assassins. They were mothers. They were all like everywhere. So I don't understand the contrast to Game of Thrones at all. Like, or like. It doesn't. Yeah, that doesn't make any sense to me. Now, as for like, let's take this back. Like portrayal, like the you can't win kind of situation with portrayal of women. Look, George R. R. Martin was trying to portray realism, or at least an exaggeration of realism, to prove a point. He's showing that women are oppressed, and that part of their story is, casting off the chains of oppression. And that's like the whole point of Daenerys's tale, right? So, to say like that only came after humiliation, like I don't understand. Like all the characters, male and female, are humiliated at different points. That's life, right? That's hard life. Hard life is about humiliation and then overcoming that humiliation, right? So I don't know if I get what they're saying. I think they're trying really desperately hard to say something, and I'm not sure what they're trying to say. That somehow in Shogun there's a better portrayal of women.
Better portrayal of women and better portrayal of the downtrodden. Which,
if you're going to show downtrodden women, then you're going to show humiliation. Like, I don't understand like how you can accuse Game of Thrones of humiliating women and not, Japanese society, and not to mention Japanese society 400 years ago or 300. I forget when exactly. This is taking place. I know that Japanese isolation began 400 years ago, but so, I mean, is he serious that somehow like in Japanese society, there's better treatment of women than in Western society? Because no, like what historically is there better treatment of women in Japanese society? No, like I mean, I haven't seen Shogun, but I've read the book and I know a bit about Japanese history. So I don't know what the claim is all over the map. I don't get it. Now with regards to, I want to address one thing, the ending of Game of Thrones and having the end of the show be two villainous females, Daenerys and Cersei.
You did not think Dave and Dan would do that.
I didn't think Dave and Dan would do it. It was surprising. But in retrospect, I kind of understand it. Like George is trying to say, like, look, I'm going to be feminist enough to let a woman be a villain in a story. I'm not going to just like, give a crutch and make sure that the woman is always the protagonist. But the Night's King was already like a male. The definition of patriarchy is the Night's King. I mean, he's this old man in an all male club that only accepts boys, right? And he gets killed off. So it's not that there wasn't a male villain. There was the Night's King, but not to mention Ramsay. and Joffrey, and lots of other men throughout the story. So, as bad as season 8 was, I don't necessarily think Daenerys and Cersei being villains was something bad in and of itself. The entire point of these shows is just, and the betrayal of sex and gender on screen is just to show that people are complicated. They go through different experiences, and that we're supposed to be able to sympathize with and empathize with, and that's that. And what failed with Game of Thrones season 8 is that you couldn't really relate to Daenerys or Cersei because you're not sure what's going on in their head. They're just making decisions that don't seem very logical. And
that makes them very human.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but I think people thought that Daenerys' switch went a little quick. Had they had a few more seasons, maybe it would have been accepted more or something. Or if Dan and Dave had put in more time on the whole thing. I
would argue that they could have done that fine the way they did it had they just had one scene of showing how connected in a psychic manner she is to the dragons. Each dragon's death removes a part of her mental pillar, and as they come crashing down, she just goes more crazy. They could have easily explained it.
It's like, imagine you have all of these sorts of things. Like, let's say you have a show that takes place in the 1850s in America, in the South, and you want to show a black character that has power and agency. Well, it's really tough when fucking slavery is happening, like it's really,
right.
So it's, what do you do with these situations? You can focus on exceptional characters, and Game of Thrones does. Like, it's not like Brienne of Tarths are all over the fucking place, It's not like Arya's are all over the place. Like, they're these exceptional characters, but
But before getting off this topic, like, I understand that the last few seasons of Game of Thrones were bad, but it sucks how that's all anyone ever remembers, because we had 4, I would argue 5 phenomenal seasons of Game of Thrones, and no one ever wants to remember, like, because you and I are we got to finish eventually, but you and I are going through like the first season of Thrones, the commentary track. Just all the great changes Dave and Dan made. I had this conversation with Destiny that I got to upload, where even Destiny pointed out how Game of Thrones had some phenomenal changes beyond just copying and pasting books to show. So, like, I kind of it is this article is kind of clickbaity. It really is, but I've never really liked this whole comparison of Game of Thrones being this, and even then, like, when Shogun was coming out, people were saying it was the Game of Thrones in Japan. Even I said that, and there's some truth to it. But at the same time, after Shogun finished its run, last episode was really good. I was wanting more, man. I do want a season 2, and I think they could do it. I think they could.
Yeah, and I mean, totally a lot of the characters are alive at the end, yeah?
Oh, yeah. I thought they were going to end on the Battle of Sekigahara, where it's not really the official Tokugawa or Toranaga start of his shogunate thing, but kind of almost is. It's really the battle that solidified him as the shogun. So I think season 2 could do Sekigahara. There's so much more happening. I don't know if this was in the books. Does Toranaga's brother become one of the regents?
I mean, it's been a long time. I can't say.
One of the breakout characters, I think, of the show was Toranaga's brother, who... That dude looks like a fucking Final Fantasy video game villain. Preston, he legit looks like the Japanese Aemon. Like, he's got the long hair, he's got the evil look.
Right.
Cool looking dude. He looks like he could be like a major villain of like season 2, and he just shows up for like less than 20 minutes. He's there. He does his thing, and that's it. There's no final battle. It's just basically Toranaga doing his plan, playing the puppeteer, which is awesome, but Oh man, we need a season 2. Before we get off this topic, it's just a shame that this has become Game of Thrones' legacy, that everybody wants to shit on Dave and Dan and the show in general now because of the last 2 seasons without any nuance. We had 4, I would argue 5 phenomenal seasons, and nobody ever wants to give the show its due because of that, despite the stuff in the end. And I think it just comes down to laziness and clickbait bullshit, which, okay, fine. And people were obliterating the writer of that article in the comments, and rightly so, but at the same time, like, I don't know, I'm back and forth on this. Like, I can't blame people for just remembering that ending and casting a large shadow over the whole show, but I hate how it doesn't get that respect it deserves in spite of the bad ending. I was just talking to a friend about this, and he mentioned how Sopranos was amazing, but all anybody talks about now is that ending and how it leaves things up. And yeah, Sopranos ending wasn't as bad, but it's up there. That's a good topic for like a future video, by the way. Who had a worse ending, Sopranos or Thrones? But